So we want user images next to the chat messages. And to avoid that we have to send thousands of requests to the users collection for thousands of messages potentially, I will also make sure to store a link or the URL to the image next to the message it belongs to. For the same reason I store the username there. Now, of course, if you have an app where users are allowed to edit their name or their image, that might not be the best solution because you might have to update all those existing messages, or you have to take a different route where you fetch the brand new data from the users collection for every message. But here, where this updating functionality is not possible, this definitely is a great approach to minimize the amount of requests being sent. Hence, it's in the new message widget where we send a new message, where I now don't just want to store the username, but also, let's say, a user image field here in the document besides the text of the message. And here we want to take the, image URL of the user. Now, the good thing is we are already fetching data from the users collection here. That's where we get the username from. So we can use that same user data to get access to the image URL, because in the users collection we have that image URL field here. So I can just access image URL here to get access to that URL and store it on every message that's being sent. Now, with that out of the way, here is the app running on my Android emulator, but here you again see it running on my real iPhone. And if I now type hello here as a message and I send this, you see it pop up on the left too, which is how it should work. And that's now where I want to also show the image of the user. Now, if we quickly check Firebase and our collections here, if I reload this collections page, we hopefully see that on our message in the chat collection, we also have the user image URL being stored. And that's not the case here, simply because I didn't update my real device with the latest version of that app, of course. My bad. Let me quickly do that off screen. So now the latest version is running. Let me now try this again. Hello. So now here in this chat document, we see the user image. So this is now working. Now a link to the image is being stored side by side to every message. And with that, let's now output the image next to every chat message bubble too. Now for this, I'll first of all create a new user, also here on the Android account. A different user, of course, with my dummy emulator image, which is good enough. And now we at least have two users that can communicate with each other. So now the goal is to show that user image next to the message bubble. Now we're storing the image as part of a message, which is great. That means we can pass that data to our message bubble constructor here in the messages widget. We're already passing in the username. Now we can just pass in the image URL, or as I named it here, user image actually. User image. Now we can just pass this to message bubble. And in message bubble, we now of course need to accept this extra parameter. So here in message bubble, in its constructor, after a username maybe, I also want to store the user image, but of course now we need a property of that name, and that should be of type string because the image will just be a URL in the end. It's a URL, which is a string, to that image. So now we're able to receive that image here in the message bubble. And by the way, we can clear this import here now that I see it. And with that image received, we can now output it. Now, how you want to output it is, of course, totally up to you. I will go for an approach where I will wrap this entire row into another widget, into a stack widget. And the stack widget takes some children which are organized in an array and which will be laid out on top of each other, basically. So if I just wrap this row here now, like this, not much should change. We still see our message as it looked before. But now we can add a new widget, which will be on top of the row, in a three-dimensional way, I mean. So here we could now add a circle avatar again to have a rounded image. And if I add this here, You see, this is now on top or actually below it because the stack is organized such that the further down you are in this children array, the more on top this will be visually. So we can simply move circle avatar down after row here, and now it will be on top of the row. And of course, that is roughly what I want, but not exactly. I want to have it a bit more outside of this chat bubble. And to achieve this, we can use a number widget with which I wrap the circle avatar, and that's the positioned widget. The positioned widget is designed with the stack widget in mind, which means the positioned widget helps us to position other widgets, the child of positioned to be precise, inside of a stack. Now, I'm not talking about the three-dimensional positioning. For that, you just have to order your elements correctly in the stack children. But I'm talking about the two-dimensional positioning. So for example, that these circles should be further above the message bubble or further on the right. And for that, position has a couple of helpful arguments. Precisely, it has bottom, left, right, and top. And for example here, if I set top to 0 and right to 0, it will move the circle avatar in the top right corner. Now, of course, here we see that it takes the entire width of that widget, which is the entire row, and not just the width of this container in which I have my column with the chat messages. Now, there are various ways of fixing that. And one of the easiest is that we simply set left instead of right, but not to 0, but for example to 140. And now we move the circle 140 pixels from the left. And this doesn't look too bad. I think it should be a bit further above the message bubble though. And for that we can actually even set a negative top here, for example 30. Now what you'll notice is that this now is clipped, and to avoid that this happens, you go to your stack widget, and there you can set overflow to overflow.visible. So the overflow argument on the stack widget. Now you can fully see that. Now it's a bit too much above the chat bubble, so maybe -10 works out better. And also a little bit further to the left would be nice, so maybe 120. And you can play around with that to position it in the way you want to position it. I think this doesn't look too shabby though. And with that, of course, the goal is to show the image and not just some colorful background. And for that, again, we can set the background image, which you already learned wants an image provider. Now, we previously saw the image provider for a file image. Now we basically have a network image. We have a URL to an image on some server. And for that, there is a dedicated provider, and that's the network image provider. And this provider, network image, simply wants a link, a URL to that image. And here I will simply use the user image property, which holds that image. So here we have user image. And with this, you see the image here for this user who posted this image. And that's exactly the look I want. And if I, for example, answer here, you also see it on my post. Now, of course, it's positioned correctly because we always position it basically in the top right corner. Now, that is the positioning we want for our messages, but not for our own messages, because our own messages show up on the right, not on the left. Now, for that, we got that useful isMe property, which is a boolean that basically tells us whether this is a post by us or not. And we can use this to fine-tune the positioning. The top positioning is always fine, but if this is us, if this is me, I don't want to have left 120. Instead, then I probably don't want to position this from the left side at all. So we can set this to null here. Now, of course, I want to position it though, but from the right side. So therefore we can add right. And if this is me, I want to use 120 from the right here and null otherwise, which is the not me case. So now you see it's positioned correctly, both if that's me as well as when it's the other user. So now we can type here and send more messages and ultimately add more and more messages with our extra image. Now you'll also see a little glitch here when we have multiple messages. So maybe we should have a little bit more spacing between our messages. And that's something we can also configure here in the message bubble, because there we get this container and we set up some margin around our messages already. Maybe we should use 10 here. Now there is more spacing available, maybe actually 16 on the vertical axis. And now this looks way better. And you can also see, of course, that this is scrollable in case it should exceed the boundaries of our screen. So that looks good. Now we're rendering the messages here with our user image. Because of the margin, actually, the image is now not positioned perfectly anymore. Let me fix this by setting top to 0 again. Yeah, so this now looks great. This is now the final state I want to have here. With that, we got the authentication, we got the chat, we got the images. Now, of course, there's just one thing missing, and that would be the push notifications.